This is a bit of a change of pace to what we've been hearing all along. There's been a formal acknowledgement to country, but I will say to the GBR mob, things are getting better, recognition is improving, and I look forward to a much greater presence for the mob in the future. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Sheriden Morris. I'm the Managing Director at RRC, which runs the National Environmental Science Program and has done in its various iterations for the last 17 years. Now, it used to be mostly focused on the Great Barrier Reef, but now it's sort of spread across the whole of Northern Australia. Prior to that, I was at CSIRO, and then before that, 10 years at the Marine Park Authority. So I'm old and I've been around a bit. Okay. Today I have the honour of joining with Professor Helene Marsh to recognise Jon Brodie's scientific leadership in the protection of the Great Barrier Reef. Can I say this is a bit of a tough presentation for me because I was, like some of you here, we're all colleagues of Jon. So can you cut me a little bit of slack if I get pathetic? Okay, Jon, where do I press this? Right. Jon shared the rarefied position with others such as Virginia Chadwick, who was the chair and CEO of the Marine Park Authority in the early 20s, and together whose pivotal contributions have fundamentally underpinned the future of the reef. But sadly, we recognise these contributions posthumously. For those who actually attended Jon Day's presentation this morning, you may be aware that we came so close to not succeeding in rezoning the reef. It was a bit touch and go there quite a few times, and mate, that was 20 years ago. Old bugger. In truth, even with all the science available at the time and all the goodwill in the world, it was the absolute drive and unfettered determination by Virginia Chadwick and the Gurumpa team at the time that pushed the rezoning forward against all opposition and all resistance. There was no hesitation, there was no self-preservation in leadership that led to this world-renowned reef protection. This approach was also, oops, I missed that one, didn't I? This approach was also true for Jon Brodie. So it's an honour to be able to highlight his essential qualities that delivered success in driving science into policy and enshrining water quality as an issue that required both attention and significant funding. He courageously sparred with ministers, both state and federal, and departmental staff very frequently. And this is a pretty dangerous act when they control your funding. He had no restraint when speaking truth to power, none at all. And when he encouraged them way too much, they simply did their best to exclude him. He became a target, he became a target for the sugar industry and grazing industry as he pushed for practice change. When his challenges he presented were not achieved, he just tenaciously fought harder. It's a special type of self-belief not to be coerced into the safety of scientific groupthink and also to be prepared to take your views out in the general public. It's very different from sitting in a room like this to be out there. Jon and I couldn't have been more different. Yet he brought me into the fold to help me drive the agenda for land use practice change to improve water quality. We delivered the first water quality protection plan in 2003. That was 21 years ago. And since then, there has been 3 more. Jon liked to be unpredictable, even contrary. He had no interest in conforming to a pre-packaged version of what research manager should be. When he finished being a manager, he moved back to his research world and carried on his influence from there. In 2020, sadly, Jon passed from melanoma. Through the last years of his illness, Jon held absolute disdain for self-pity. He had been to hell and back and yet somehow never lost his energy or his optimism or his zest for life. So cancer didn't scare him. And he maintained that spirit to the very end, too stubborn to sit still, always opinionated, fiercely opinionated, and fiercely devoted to his cause in protecting the reef. And to Jane Waterhouse, who stood by Jon through everything, absolutely everything, You have my pure admiration. Jon never hesitated to leave, and when it was unpopular, even though it was unpopular often, and impacted his career. And importantly, he showed a largeness of spirit, mentoring and paving the way for the next generation. Some here today, and many young researchers have benefited from his absolute commitment and wisdom for navigating the science to policy path. For all Jon and my differences, for all the times we sparred, I never hid or tried to hide the long-standing respect I had for him. For Jon had concluded that the only way to really make his mark on the world was to commit to something way bigger than himself and way outside his own self-interest. And that's why when he spoke of the value of knowledge and the importance of evidence-based policy making, it didn't ring hollow. They weren't just words to him, it was the truth he led by and the values he brought to leadership. I cast around to some fellow travellers who were close to Jon to capture the qualities of him as a change maker. Most of the time they talked about his frank and fearless advice, how he didn't care if he was unpopular and out of step, but he always put evidence first and information up behind his opinions. When the conservation movement used to seek Jon out as their go-to scientist, and he often gave them uncomfortable advice also. And one thing that I kept hearing over and over again was that his uncompromising views and his clarity of expression are needed more today. I will say, in truth, for all us oldies, and there's a couple of them around the room that I can actually look at, and I'm not just looking at you, Jon Day, there is a classic nostalgia for management culture of the time. Can I say this is understandable? Because most of the significant basis for the current reef management was achieved during this time. The rezoning of the marine park, the development of the first water quality protection plan, the dugong protection zones, the first trawl and reef line fishery management plans, and all of it had to be within a challenging level of public consultation. The privilege of the safe academic environment was not afforded to these initiatives. It was a time when nearly everyone at the marine park was exposed to the harsh realities of pushing forward a new agenda. By my second year of working with Jon, I had given over 220 public presentations, mostly to hostile crowds in farming communities, and with me trying my best to convince them to change how they farm to be able to protect the reef better. Fortunately for me, I was only punched in the face once, and over time developed some pretty lively self-protection techniques. You deal with farmers, you get good at this after a while. Driving change was not for the faint-hearted. Most here today have engaged in the challenge of finding solutions to protect the reef in the face of climate change. So taking a bit of time out to seek approaches that have been successful in the past is a really worthwhile exercise. Personally, I know this from initiating the concept of integrated pest management for COTS control through the National Environmental Science Program, but I found that the experience that I had previously in introducing new approaches made this challenging, but not nearly as painful. So the more practice you get at doing this, the better you get at it, is all I can say. I will say, and to the researchers in the room, it's a privilege to be left alone to actually research your special topic. And it's very easy to have an opinion about what should be done. It is a completely different kettle of fish when you have to create the agenda, convince your peers, convince the department, convince the Minister's office, hunt down some funds, convince Cabinet and Treasury, then find the best research partners, co-develop the program with industry, First Nations and community, develop the appropriate trust frameworks, use the research outputs to influence policy and industry action, and then work with practitioners to develop successful outcomes. Remember, that's what a manager has to do. So cut them a bit of slack, because it is a hard game. It really is. And of course, at the end of all that, be prepared to find out that success has many fathers and failure is a bastard. and you'll know that well and truly. This whole process takes its toll. So perhaps the best way to honour Jon's achievement is by recognising that some things are better than ambition or money or comfort. And these commitments are worth risking a whole lot for. These are the principles of leadership that are eternal and abiding. At his best, Jon Brodie showed us what that actually means. And for that, we are deeply in his debt. And with that, I'd like to invite Helene up to follow on. Thanks, Helene.
Thanks, Sheriden. That might be a hard act to follow. So I've approached this slightly differently. I didn't work as closely as with Jon as Sheriden, but I've tried to step back and think about some take-home messages for things that we can learn from Jon's career and his effectiveness. So I've got about 5 what I see as take-home messages, and the first one is that I think a scientist interested in policy change can make more of a difference if they understand how government works. Now, I think the reason that Sheriden asked me to speak today is that I've been around even longer than she has or Jon, and which just makes me very old. And I've worked very closely with government over a long time, but I realise increasingly that I've never worked for government. And so I've never been really close to the nitty-gritty, pointy end of the policy process. Now, Jon was very different because he oscillated in his career between universities, both overseas and JCU in Australia, and worked for government for about Garumpa for about 10 years, and where he really worked for research and monitoring and also in the water quality coastal development space. And then he came back to JCU with insider knowledge. And he applied that knowledge very effectively, particularly in the water quality area and the water quality protection plans, etc., that Sheriden spoke about. I think that as a university, we ignored effectively his insider knowledge, and we didn't really use that to educate the next generation really effectively. You mean I've only got 5 minutes? Oh, well, Sheridan's cheated here. Hey, I thought I had... All right, I'm going to have to be very quick in that case. I can't... So my next thing about Jon was, I think his motto was, don't say no, give it a go. And he completed many projects in his time, and they were usually done with a shoestring budget and much faster than anyone could have reasonably expected. Somehow he brought his magic to inspire his team to do it. He was a can-do person, and I think that people make a difference, who make a difference are can-do. He also, and Sheriden mentioned about this, communicated clearly and had an instinct for doing it at the right time. That really frustrated a lot of workshop facilitators because he would come in and capture it from the get-go, but everyone got the message. He even, and I'm not going to dwell on this because you can read it, he did this very effectively in the title of some of his papers. Who can resist reading titles like that? He also realised that building trust takes time. I think we are, and this meeting brings this up, much more attuned to the needs of end users and including rights holders and traditional owners, and the partnerships process is increasingly well developed. But Jon was way ahead of his time on that, because he actually worked, for example, with traditional owners in Torres Strait about their concerns with regard to the Octedi mine and water quality and what it was doing to the safety of the meat of dugong and turtle for 30 years. He went back and back. His first report was in the early 1990s. His last report on this was published after his death in 2021. No wonder people trusted him, because he had this amazing network of trust that he built over time. I want to also say that a scientific legacy should be more than an H index. We all like simple numbers, particularly promotions committees. I want to say that sophisticated evaluations of science, such as conducted by the Royal Society or the Australian Academy of Science, actually ban the use of H indices, and I know that from an insider perspective with regard to the Academy, because they see that the scientific legacy is much more than that. And, you know, Jon published a lot and he had a pretty good H index, which is rising, but he also built these networks of teams over a long time, as you will see from comparing the computer, looking at the photograph on the right, and also, if you are clever, you will see that there is a person who may be here, and the photograph on the right is also in the photograph on the left. They have been there for he built these teams, he built these networks, and he left a legacy of people who could slip into his very large shoes and continue his legacy. And Jane Waterhouse is, of course, building, developing and in charge of the next water quality consensus statement. So I think that we need to think about Jon's incredible qualities, his tenacity, his can-do, his capacity to make a difference fast, build teams, build a legacy. When we think about the big questions that are facing us today, and I'll just put a few of these up, and that we're going to have to answer. I developed these with Jane Waterhouse in the water quality space, but, you know, how does the quest to improve water quality need to change given the impact of extreme events? What should be the KPIs for quality improvement? Are the targets appropriate? Can they ever be achieved in time? Can the dollars currently being expended on water quality, could they be better spent by combining water quality initiatives with other things? And are our current management approaches the best we can do? Jon raised these questions today. And I think these are all big questions that, as a scientific community and in the collaboration with stakeholders and rights holders, we have to answer. And I hope that we can bring Jon's qualities to the conversation. So I'd like to thank Jon for his clarity, wisdom, insights and dedication to the not-so-great Barrier Reef, as he called it. And I'd like to finally end with this quote, and this is: the future of the Great Barrier Reef depends on what we do today for the next generation of scientists, working fast to be fearless and speak truth to power. And if you all do that, Jon's legacy will live on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriden. Thank you, Helene. We were meant to finish at 2:30, but I'm sure we've got time for a question because the other groups, I think, haven't come in yet. So any questions for either Helene or Sheriden? Or Jon?
Hi, I'm Julie from Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. I didn't know Jon, but I just wanted to say that hearing what you all had to say about him today was really inspiring, so thank you for sharing his story.